Three. Hey guys, thank you so much for chiming in this evening. This is Shirley Hussar with Urban Game Changers, and we are here today to talk about the movement of ADOS because I said it's one thing to watch, it's another thing to move. But if you move and you don't have a clarity, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the abilities to execute because you don't have the knowledge, then it sets you back. The purpose of what we want to do in this video is to promote clarity. And the clarity comes when we have conversations with one another. You're watching Shirley Hussar, CEO of Urban Game Changers, and you also have Willie Larson, Urban Game Changers Florida and Fight Back Media News Radio Network. That's right, a gentleman that is involved in the urban communities and active. Willie, how are you doing today?
I'm well. It's a wonderful Wednesday here in Florida. The weather is perfect for January, and we're looking forward to a prosperous and
well, let's get right into it. The topic matter. I want to talk about a clarity of understanding white Americans, for Black Americans and whites from a Black perspective. And I think that we can have an adult conversation here without it seeming like it's racist, bias, or bigot. We want to promote clarity and understanding where they stand, where we stand, and how we need to move forward because our cultures over history have intertwined. And so what today I want to do is just show you a little data about that history and how we need to move forward from that. Genealogy. Genealogy is important because we need to know who, what we are. And I want to show you a little bit of something of a video that's a little lengthy. So those who are chiming in, be patient with me. I may take breaks in between, but I want you to see what Blacks are in America and who we are. And it's going to be told by a professor. And I want you to hear this part of the video because, again, this video is to understand, are white people ADOS? And did white people get reparations? Because that's what we want to know. Because they did. You have white people who are ADOS, and you have white people who get reparations. But what do we get out of all of this? That's what we all want to know, right? What are we getting out of any of this? So let's get to the subject matter, and we'll go from there.
Identity is everything, not just identity in the sense of categories or boxes or squares that you're checking off, but really being able to place, who you are and then how you're interpreting that in your life and then in the wider world.
Trying to find your identity is one of the hardest issues, and people get so caught up in that.
I believe that people, when they know more about their story, have more empathy for other people. And having more empathy ultimately means we're more kind to one another.
Every ancestor that we have has a story waiting to be told. All we have to do is find that ancestor, and that story will be unleashed. It was only in retrospect that I realized when my love of searching for ancestors was born. And I even know the date. It was July 3rd, 1960. And that was the day that we buried my father's father, Edward St. Lawrence Gates. Then we came back to the Gates family home. And my father took us upstairs to his parents' bedroom. And he's looking for something, furiously looking for something. My brother and I don't know what's going on. And finally he finds it. And you know what it was? It was an obituary. It was dated January 6, 1888. And it said, died this day in Cumberland, Maryland, Jane Gates, an estimable colored woman. An estimable colored woman. And he said, that is Jane Gates. That is your great-great-grandmother. She's the oldest Gates we've ever found. I never want you to forget her name. And I never want you to forget her image. So I figured, wow, I come from this woman who possessed enough quality and dignity for this adjective to be mentioned in our very short obituary. I wanted to connect myself to the man we had buried and to the woman whose photograph we had found in my grandfather's scrapbook.
I knew it had to do with ancestry. I had been doing some research on my family, so my hope was I'd learn a little bit more about my family.
I was intrigued because I was already on some level in the mind frame of doing that type of research. We knew that there were some blanks in our family tree, and I was thinking, maybe we might find some connections or whatever.
We were all separated as a group at the beginning, and then they brought us together to meet Lisa and have her start to give us the background.
Nice to meet you. Sky, okay. Hi.
I'm Gail.
Sorry.
Gail,
Scott, nice to meet you.
And then we were just like, hi, how you doing? Didn't know really why we were all together.
Well, welcome to Brooklyn. We want to talk a little bit today about the history of this area. Brooklyn at the time, about early 1800s, was really a highly agricultural area. So once the ferry came into existence, the life in Brooklyn started to really boom. There was a Navy yard that was built down the way. More and more ships were coming in, more and more factories and industries are being built down here. Because there was such hustle and bustle, it also made it a great place for fugitive slaves during that time to come into Brooklyn instead of the city, because going to the city was more dangerous. Slave catchers trying to return them to their masters for rewards or things like that.
And as slave catcher, I mean, is this a job that anyone could take on? Do you have to be deputized, or how did that work?
No, I mean, anyone at any time was encouraged to return a slave to the owner because it was a slave was considered property. If you harbored a slave in your home, or if you helped them across, a river, you were considered a thief because you were stealing property. The Fugitive Slave Act was telling people it is a law that if you know something, you have to then disclose that information.
One common misconception is that New York, being a free state since 1827, was a safe place for African Americans, and it really wasn't. New York was heavily, heavily invested in the Southern economy.
Whereas Brooklyn, on the other hand, they're very pro-union. There was a lot of abolitionists. Think about that, right across the way. It's its own Mason-Dixon line, so to speak, right? Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do now is do a walking tour through some different places around Brooklyn that have some really cool historical value. So this particular place is home to a very important person in Brooklyn. His name was—
So let me stop there. Willie, you're watching right now. And what we're watching, you guys, for those who just chimed in, we're watching the 2019 Sundance Film Festival. And we're talking about white people as far as white people who are ADOS and white people who are colonists. And where do we play a role with white people? And do they play a role with us? I wanted to break down this documentary. Now, we're not going to watch all of it, but we're going to watch a lot of it so that we can have discussions. Willie, I have a question. It's interesting because a lot of historical monuments, specifically on the East Coast, are very historical and very slave related. Do people realize that, or what has happened that we've gotten away from not even knowing our local history surrounding us?
There are a lot of moving parts to that. Why aren't people learning local history? And how school systems and school districts are built. In Florida, for instance, where I grew up, one of the required classes used to be you had to take it was a semester class. That's no, and I'm sure other states had similar requirements. That's no longer a requirement. It has been a requirement for 30 years or more. So there's a lot of people who don't have any idea about where they live. And if you combine how mobile and transient we are, you may grow up in a place that you weren't born, or you moved to somewhere as an adult, and the local it really doesn't mean as much to you because you're not from there. So there are a lot of moving parts to that, especially in Florida, where we're just a transient state. It is from somewhere else here. Everybody. For instance, my county where I live, more than 60% of the people who live in my county in the state of Florida. So that makes the native Hillsborough County person a minority place they grew up and the place they were born. So,
but even though it
I think
makes
there's
them
a
a
lot of
minority, does it also make it, and even though it makes them a minority, doesn't make it more irresponsible on our part not to drive the narrative of the foundation that was laid by our people? And that's why I think this documentary is important, is in that we talk about white colonists, white reparations, and white ADOS people, if they exist, and how would they even exist. I think that's the talk. Let's keep on with the video, and we'll keep moving from there.
Was Lewis Tappan.
Lewis Tappan is an extremely important abolitionist. He was one of the founding members of the American Abolitionist Society. He was a very successful merchant and leveraged his wealth for abolitionist causes.
Even in abolitionist circles, he was considered extreme. He believed in interracial marriage.
Okay.
And this is in the 1850s, where that's just not something that happens. In fact, it was illegal. He also helped with many people that went through the Underground Railroad.
Underground meant secret, and railroad was just an emerging technology for transportation. The stations were places that people stopped. The conductors were the guides that helped people on their way. People themselves who were escaping slavery were often referred to as passengers.
A lot of the people that were in the Underground Railroad went to Canada because slavery was abolished there. And so that was the true safe haven. It's a very complicated construct of people that were both white and black helping people get to freedom.
He actually brought a fugitive slave to his home and gave this girl a Thanksgiving dinner up in the attic while he was entertaining guests down below.
Wow.
So had to hide her. This particular fugitive slave actually dressed up as a boy.
The more you dig in, the more it becomes real people with real challenges and aspirations, and you start to feel that much more connected to your own history.
So we finished here. We're going to take you on one last stop.
Dear Gail, welcome to Plymouth Church.
You are sitting among more family members than you may realize.
This place played a critical story in lives of many people, including your own family.
It was in the hidden corners and secret passages below this room that many enslaved people found their way to freedom. Your family was among them.
Hi. Hello. Hello. Welcome to Plymouth.
Plymouth is a really fascinating place. Henry Ward Beecher and the people there at that time were able to influence the way that people thought about slavery in the run-up to the Civil War. I don't know if any of you have heard of Henry Ward Beecher, but in his own day, he was a superstar.
Henry Ward Beecher was outrageous. I mean, he was a passionate abolitionist with a flair for the theatrical.
He was a dramatic, fiery preacher who drew attention to important social issues, most importantly, ending slavery.
So I'm going to stop right there. Willie, it's interesting. I love this documentary, by the way. It's one of my favorites. For those who just chimed in, thank you for watching Shirley's World. We are discussing the cross-pollination of white people who are colonists, white people who may be ADOS. We don't know. How are white people ADOS? Come on, let's really talk. And then also white people who are working or may not be working for us. What is the common ground that we have, or the ground we disagree with? We have to understand America's history. From what you've seen here, Willie, what can you give from your perspective? I mean, just being an outsider watching this documentary, here they've gathered these people and they're taking them through history, and there's actually still existing underground areas for Black people, where it seems like today we are creating a new type of underground railroad.
Well, I think that we don't know a lot about this history because it's history. No, and I'm not going to be a conspiratorialist to say that this history was intentionally held from us, but I think that a lot of people don't know that there is that connection, and frankly, there is benefit to for a lot of people who are the denizens of division that we don't have a shared history, because Black people get told all the time that we don't have a shared history with white people in America. When the fact of the matter is, shared history, because we were here at the same time. And there was, like you said, cross-pollination, like you do with flowers. I don't know. But there was a cross-pollination. So there is a shared history. And there may be a shared history because of that shared history, it is, and people have to do their research to find out if there's actually people who are Caucasian who are ADOS, because so early. We've already learned that there were people who were involved in the abolitionist movement that were way ahead of the game, that were pro interracial marriage. So so that cross-pollination just wasn't evil slave owner. It was other things that cause, but all we hear about is the evil slave owners, right? That's all we hear about. So I think this is a good, and you mentioned this in the open, we can have this conversation without racist overtones or bigotry, an open intellectual conversation about what actually happened. And I think that might make this whole idea operations and ADOS in America a lot more palatable to people, frankly. If we share that white people and Black people in America do have a shared history. And so far, as I think these people are about to learn in the documentary as they read, is that their history with this particular family of Black people and this particular family of white folks, that they have a shared history. Opening, quite frankly, to both of them.
I totally agree. Let's keep going.
This space was built in 1849 under the direction of Henry Ward Beecher. As we come forward, we'll just take a little moment to notice the row that has Abraham Lincoln's signature on it. This is where Abraham Lincoln sat when he visited the church in February of 1860. But if you imagine this church in the time of Henry Ward Beecher, it would have been filled to the rafters with people. There was no Brooklyn Bridge at that time, so people would come across the river by boat, which came to be nicknamed Beecher boats, because so many people came specifically to visit Plymouth and to hear Henry Ward Beecher speak.
2,000 people would come from all over the place. The drawings from the time, it's just a sea of faces because everyone was so absolutely fascinated by Beecher and what he was saying. He was a total rock star.
Dear Niall, welcome to Plymouth Church. You were not the first person from your family to find their way here. You were sitting above a catacomb that changed the story of so many people who, like your ancestors, took matters into their own hands to earn their freedom.
We're now in the upstairs section of Plymouth Church. In a little while, we're going to go visit the basement. There was a second level of activity happening here where members of the congregation were working along with members of the Underground Railroad to help people escaping slavery find their way north.
Mm-hmm. Dear Gail, welcome to Plymouth Church. You are the daughter of Carol, the daughter of John,
Daughter of Robert, the son of Joan, who was the daughter of John,
Daughter of Ronald, the son of Joan, who was the daughter of John,
who was the son of Joseph,
who was the son of Mary, who was the daughter of John and Arabella Weems. John was a free man, but his wife, Arabella, was enslaved. Their children were also enslaved and eventually separated. Hope for reunion became real when the Weems' first daughter, Mary Jane, escaped to Canada. She was free for the first time since her birth. In a powerful demonstration that she finally had control over her own life, she took control of her own name, changing it from Mary Jane to Stella. It may seem small, but imagine the feeling it would have given her to be able to determine for herself who she was. John found in Stella's escape that there was hope for all his children to be together and free. So he came to New York to raise money to buy his own family back.
Realizing that the slave trader was making it impossible to buy Anna Marie's freedom, a plan was made. She was able to escape. And she made her way to Brooklyn, dressed as a boy, oh wow, where she was helped by the family of someone in this room. Wow, I'm sorry. It's like everything is coming back to me.
Dear Seth.
So here we have a situation where these people are learning about their ancestors. And they're learning not through DNA, because I know y'all don't like this DNA thing, but DNA is still important. I still think it's an important part of who are knowing what you are, because most Black people in America who are descendants of slaves don't even know where to start. So the question has always been to me, surely, where do we start to identify our relationship with these people, these white people? Do we relate with them? And Willie, you said earlier, which I thought was so brilliant, which is cross-pollination. Let's take that word and make that a note. Get your handy dandy notebooks out and write cross-pollination of the creation created by the colonists of this country was through Blacks and whites, through Black people who are descendants of slaves. And in knowing that, that is our starting point. Our starting point comes to when they determine to make us a human. We weren't looked upon as subhuman. And that's actually during the era of the 1863, where we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of and the Emancipation. The Emancipation set the tone for the reparations of the recreation and the correction of the reconstruction of America. But what happened, my people, listen to me, pay attention, take notes, this is important. The reconstruction of America never was fully reconstructed, because what happened was it was reconstructed not for our benefit, but because of Andrew Johnson, we are in the demise and the default of not being provided the provisions to correct the failures and the hurts that this country put our people through and what we've gone through. Willie, let's go back and talk about the cross-pollination and what we're seeing here, how these people, how they had to get creative to own their name, to own their space.
Well, it's interesting that most people who are reasonable, who can understand that when, especially during that time that was turbulent and dangerous, frankly, was for the escaping slaves, it was also dangerous for the people who were helping them too. So everybody was kind of we're all kind of and it's just human nature that there would have been some cross-pollination. People move further north, and especially got into Canada, where there were Caucasians and the natives. We call them Indians, but there were natives there as well. So it only makes sense. That colonization, and through that cross-pollination, you started to get people who were mostly white or mostly native, who were also part of people's families who had been enslaved. It only makes sense. So again, that connected history that we don't get told, because the denizens of the division would rather us not, are more alike or more similar than dissimilar, have not pushed this part of the discussion. That this, that this video is connecting these two families, because it isn't, obviously, Shirley, it's not just, I'm sure there were hundreds, thousands of families during that time that had some sort of real connection, some really genealogical, because of their history. And once you find out that you have, again, that you're more similar than dissimilar, lot of things that we fight and argue about just seem silly.
I want to add more to that, but when you talk about cross-pollination, one of the things that I think about is the cross-pollination to build this country, because you still need humans, right? You have all this land that's new, free land. You still need humans, and those humans weren't saying, "Hey, let's bus in or let's drive in people from other countries." We're talking about blacks and whites primarily, and the colonists. The whites,
people who are already here, yeah.
Right. The people who are already here. Because let's go back. Let's be real. This country was founded by the colonists. Everyone can agree with that. If we go back to 1776, the colonists created this country to what? To leave the queen. And they wanted to create this land called America. But the only way they were going to be able to build this land is to create this form of slavery, which didn't start in America. That had been going for some time. And the boats that landed in this country, America, that had the stronger blacks who survived everything hell underwater to get here, were the descendants of slaves. Now, can somebody give me an amen on that one? Can someone give me a thumbs up and some likes? Please share this video. I want to have a discussion so that we understand the white colonization, white people, white ADOS, in a civilized manner without people saying you're being racist or biased. I think that we need to have a clarity of these white people who some of us may not know we may be related to. And if we are, what does that really mean?
We're all cousins. We're all cousins. We are all everybody's cousin.
Okay, so if they cousin, do we invite them to the barbecue? Because last time, some of them folks, they can't cue too well. I'm just saying. But I do know some white people can barbecue.
You invite them, but cook. You invite them, but you don't let them bring. You don't let them bring like potato salad. They let them bring potato chips and napkins and cups. Just kidding, white folks. So just chill out.
I'm sorry, I just came back from Texas, and I mean, some of those people out there, they know how to cue real well, and they weren't black. But let's keep going.
Of someone in this room. Wow, I'm sorry. It's like everything is coming back to me.
I'm going to back it up a little bit.
To raise money to buy his own family back.
Realizing that the slave trader was making it impossible to buy Anna Marie's freedom, a plan was made. She was able to escape. And she made her way to Brooklyn, dressed as a boy, where she was helped by the family of someone in this room. Wow, I'm sorry. It's like everything is coming back to me.
Dear Seth, as you already know, you are the descendant of one of the most influential members of the Underground Railroad in New York. You are the son of Diana, the daughter of Daphne, who was the daughter of Rosamond, who was the daughter of Ellen, who was the daughter of William, the son of Lewis Tappan.
So let's stop right there. So this is him, and this is his chain, his mother's mother, and it goes all the way up, Father, to how he's related to this historical piece in history. And it's important that you start at home and start asking questions about who are you? Black ADOS people. How do you know you related to slaves? You can, I know my family's from Alabama. That sets the tone. No, it doesn't. Because you need to understand who you are. You need to know who your mother's full name is, your grandmother's full name is, your great-grandfather's full name is, your great-great-grandmother's full name is, as far back as you can go. And if you can't get any further, then you look up Ancestry.com. You look up 23andMe on the genealogy side. You don't have to do the DNA if you don't feel comfortable in that, but you can get a genealogist and people who do records to find this. Fortunately, Ancestry has done all these people that we're seeing sitting in this church, these black and white people, these white people who are colonists and are black, white people ADOS. This man, this white man you see here is a white colonist man. His father is tied to the slave Underground Railroad, and they are telling him a full perspective of American history. Let's keep going.
Lewis believed in equality and felt deeply that there must be an end to racism. He was a member of this church and may have stood in the spot where you are now. His home is a short walk from here, and his doors were open to provide haven for fugitive slaves. If you look around, you are among the family members of Anna Maria Weems, who has a very personal connection to your family. Louis Tappan sheltered her in his home after a harrowing escape.
She spent her first Thanksgiving night in safety. Regardless of the risk, Anna Marie stayed hidden in the Tappins' home till it was safe to smuggle her to freedom in Canada. Enclosed, you will find the records of a family reunited in Canada in 1861. I went to Canada 2 years ago for the first time in my life, and I felt like at home. It was really a powerful experience. And it's so interesting because in my family, I've been the one that's traveled a lot, just maybe searching for some pieces. And I also remember some years ago having an experience. It was like a meditation, but it was more than that. But it was it was a woman, and it was like an ancestor. She was like a slave, and she wanted me to say her name. She was like, "Say my name." There was no name. I didn't know the name. But there's some names here. So thank you.
I'm going to pause it right there. Come back to the share screen. Let's talk to some of you guys in the chat room. Willie, what's your take on this?
I'm unmuted. I think it's a very interesting story. I think that there's a lot of conversations in a lot of places about who people are, what identity means to people, and what that sort of identity means. It's on a spectrum. It doesn't mean everything to everybody. For some people, it does. For some, I mean, frankly, for some folks, it doesn't mean anything at all. And I think that we have to be aware of that. And for some people, this woman seems this cathartic moment here, and because her identity means everything to her. At the beginning of the video, because I am paying attention, I want you to know I am paying attention. The voiceover talks about identity and how knowing who they are. And I think that if we can have that conversation in the ADOS community, and be real about it, and not be, I don't know. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Shirley, there seems to be a lot of to it that doesn't need to be there. Like the example you gave, where you go, well, I'm from Alabama, so I must be. Well, maybe not. It doesn't make you any less. It doesn't make you any less if you're not. However, when we start talking about, we're not talking about everybody. We're not talking about everybody. We're not talking about who went through Jim Crow and the like, who may be from the from the islands, or who might not have the same genealogy and may not share the same history. So all Shirley is trying to do when we're talking about is getting clarity. Everybody is, and that doesn't necessarily make anybody better or worse than anybody else, but we can have a logical discussion on if we're going to talk about ADOS. That ADOS ain't everybody necessarily, but it doesn't have to be, and that's fine. So I think this is an interesting documentary. I think it's also an interesting commercial for Ancestry.com, but because a lot of people are very interested.
A lot of people
they are. My wife is super interested in it. And frankly, I'm not nearly as interested. And I think it has to do with how her family life was, and how they all came from a small town and stayed together. And my family, quite frankly, was a cluster. I don't have nearly the interest that my wife does.
Well, we talk about reparations, we talk about white colonists, but we don't talk about how we are related to those people and how the cross-pollination of blacks and whites to developing America sets a tone for us to understand, and that the other cultures who came later on, the importance and the value of what we brought and what we bring to this table. And I think it upsets me in so many ways where I see people thinking that you have to listen and understand their narrative in the country where I came from and my people and we suffer. I don't really want to hear your plight because you're not receptive to what my people have gone through. I want to go through a couple of pieces of history. We talk about reparations, Willie, but a lot of people don't realize that there are white people in this country who have gathered reparations. They also have been able to gather money. And if we go back to the era of, you see this article in the New York Times, this is an article that came out in April. This story has just been retossed so that people understand. This is when the slave owners got reparations. Now, this is before Lincoln died. Lincoln signed a bill in 1862 that paid, listen to this, people, that paid up to $300 for every slave owner who had slaves. The slave master had to realize these people are no longer slaves. They are freed people. These are freedmen people, and these freedmen people have certain rights. And I'm just going to let you hear a little bit of this article, and I want to get your comment from this, Billy. Let me just kind of play a little bit of this article here.
On April 16th, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed a bill emancipating enslaved people in Washington, the end of a long struggle. But to ease slave owners' pain, the District of Columbia Emancipation Act paid those loyal to the Union up to $300 for every enslaved person freed. That's right, slave owners got reparations. Enslaved African Americans got nothing for their generations of stolen bodies, snatched children, and expropriated labor other than their mere release from legal bondage. The compensation clause is not likely to be celebrated today, but as the debate about reparations for slavery intensifies, it is important to remember that slave owners, far more than enslaved people, were always the primary beneficiaries of public largesse. The act is notable because it was the first time that the federal government authorized abolition of slavery, which hastened its demise in Virginia and Maryland as runaways from these states fled to Washington. It offered concrete proof to enslaved people and their allies that the federal government might facilitate the destruction of slavery everywhere. And it confirmed the worst fears of their foes about an interloping tyrannical president.
So here we have a situation really where white people got paid. They got reparations. They got $300 for every slave that they owned, the slave master. Now, this is before Lincoln died. I keep emphasizing that, before Lincoln died, because we're going to talk about everything that happened or that was supposed to happen. And then there was something that twist that we need to discuss. And that discussion is, where do we get reparations? So I'm going to go to another section which talks about this gentleman here, General William T. Sherman, Special Field Order number 15. There's been a lot of conversation about this article, about this particular special ordered field, because this is our reparations. It was never called reparations. Write this down, people. We weren't supposed to get reparations. We were supposed to get a special order ordered by the President of the United States, and General William T. Sherman was supposed to enforce these laws in place. And this is before Lincoln died. So let's give a breakdown of this. I'm going to do this in section. Let's start with this section. First of all, what is reparations in form of what we know? There's 40 acres in the mule everyone talks about.
On January 16th, 1865, Union General William T. Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15, which confiscated as federal property a strip of coastal land extending about 30 miles inland from the Atlantic and stretching from Charleston, South Carolina 245 miles south to Jacksonville, Florida. The order gave most of the roughly 400,000 acres to newly emancipated slaves in 40-acre sections. Those lands became the basis for the slogan, 40 acres and a mule, based on the belief that ex-slaves throughout the old Confederacy would be given the confiscated lands of former plantation owners. The order appears below.
Okay, so let's go through the order that was supposed to commence. And now, listen what they're saying. We're supposed to get 40 acres and a mule, extending about 30 miles down this particular area. Is what they say. Jacksonville, this is your area, Willie. Talk to me. Willie's in Florida. You know where Jacksonville, Florida is, South Carolina. Willie, talk to me, because here's a map I pulled up. It's going to be a little blurry, but we all understand this is Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina. This is prime real estate today in 2020. This is prime 2020. This is prime real estate. Willie, what happened? Here we have this prime real estate that we didn't get, but if we did get it, we would be another nation of people.
Well, what had happened was, and you guys know what happened. Lincoln was assassinated, and Andrew Johnson became the president because that's how they did it. Andrew Johnson was part of the Democrat Party at the time, and I don't want to get in that discussion but that's how it was. Whoever came in second got to be president. You know what? If the president died or was murdered, and was a sympathizer of the South, and he stopped Reconstruction, and he stopped, and through his actions and executive orders, pretty much put the kibosh on General Field Order 15. So it never took place.
Right. It never came about. This never got executed. This was the proposed idea of execution. So that there's some clarity on it. It never got to go into full force. And that's what I wanted people to understand, because people said, well, we were supposed to get 40 acres a mule. And this was a proposed idea by General Sherman, because he said, look, President, these people have served our country. They're slaves. They're free. They have money. They're soldiers in the war. What do we do with these people? So Special Order number 15 would be like a FEMA today, but it never got enforced. It never was instilled into law. Some of you guys in the chat room were saying, well, no, this was not real. No, this was real, but it never was enforced. It was never law. But let's say it was a law, because see, to me, this is where we have the friction by people. We talk about the reconstruction of America, because that's what this was. You had the North and the South, and we needed to reconstruct this country. This United States of America that you see here was split all up like this pattern that you see here. One side supported one portion of America's Constitution. The other one had their own abilities of constitutional laws that they wanted to implement. And they were split up. But when after the war, this nasty, nasty civil war, they were trying to bring us together, and they did. But in doing that, they disavowed from what they had said they were going to commit and do to us. Well, then what were we supposed to get? 40 acres and a mule. But that was not only 40 acres and a mule. And why the mules, some people say? Because the mules were used so heavily during war. They were so many mules. They said, let's just give them to the slaves. So that's why the mules. People always ask that question, why the mules? But I want you to hear more about, here's a breakdown of what should have happened. This is the completed part of the Reconstruction that we did not get, that we were supposed to get on top of the 40 acres and a mule. Let's start off with these sections here.
The islands from Charleston, south, the abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles back from the sea, and the country bordering the St. Johns River, Florida, are reserved and set apart for the settlement of the Negroes now made free by the acts of war and the proclamation of the President of the United States. 2. At Beaufort, Hilton Head, Savannah, Fernandina, St. Augustine and Jacksonville, the blacks may remain in their chosen or custom vocations. but on the islands, and in the settlements hereafter to be established, no white person whatever, unless military officers and soldiers detailed for duty, will be permitted to reside. And the sole and exclusive management of affairs will be left to the free people themselves, subject only to the United States military authority and the acts of Congress. By the laws of war and orders of the President of the United States, the Negro is free and must be dealt with as such. He cannot be subjected to conscription or forced military service, save by the written orders of the highest military authority of the department, under such regulations as the President or Congress may prescribe. Domestic servants, blacksmiths, carpenters, and other mechanics will be free to select their own work and residence, but the young and able-bodied Negroes must be encouraged to enlist as soldiers in the service of the United States, to contribute their share towards maintaining their own freedom and securing their rights as citizens of the United States.
Okay, so let's break that down. I want to break down this section right here. I find it interesting. I'm going to skip the part. Well, remember we talked earlier about that part of the land that was supposed to be settlement for them. The settlement. I'm going to start from the settlement. And Willie, let's talk about this right here.
The settlements hereafter to be established, no white person whatever, unless military officers and soldiers detailed for duty, will be permitted to reside. And the sole and exclusive management of affairs will be left to the free people themselves, subject only to the United States military authority and the acts of Congress.
For those who just chimed in, you're watching Shirley's World, and we are talking about white Americans. We're talking about the ADOS white Americans, and we're talking about the colonists. This particular part of what we're discussing is Special Order number 15 that never got to be implemented through General Sherman, who presented this to Abraham Lincoln. But due to the assassination and Andrew Johnson, who was a Democrat, he did not allow this portion to be implemented. This is huge. This is huge for us because we talk about 40 acres and a mule, but it also clarified what part of the country that we were supposed to get. Remember, we were supposed to get a lot of this part of the country. This is prime area. This is Martha's Vineyard. This is the Miami Vice area. This is South Carolina.
Shirley,
This is
Shirley, Shirley,
go ahead.
Shirley, take a breath. Take a breath. It's valuable now.
But it wasn't valuable there.
There were.
But let me say this. There was rice.
There was rice paddies.
Listen, I know, and it was snakes and it was alligators. But guess what? It would have been mine. That's the point, Willie. I know it didn't have all these attributes that we have today. I'm talking about if you are a freed man today, if you are a brother and sister who's out there who can relate to where I'm coming from, if that person said this land is yours, you're going to try to make it work. There were many times we were given many cities and they stole them from us. And that's a whole nother video. I don't want to go into that. But I wanted you just to understand, just the feeling from a slave perspective. You didn't have nothing. You were always subject to a Caesar. And they gave you this swampland. And listen, Billy, I want you to just listen. Let me tell you what I'm coming from this perspective. It says the settlement there hence after established no white person whatever unless military official and soldiers detail of duties will permit or reside. So that meant that they were going to deal with the affair. The sole executive management affairs will be left to the freed people themselves. That meant the freed people themselves were black people were left to the management. Come on, listen to me, my people, of our own affairs. There was no police here. That we set up our own laws and our own bylaws by the law of war and the order of the President of the United States. Okay, subject only to the United States military authorities and the acts of Congress. That means that we weren't subject to the way that we are structured right now, where the governors in the state and the police brutality and the policing and the prison systems that are set up and targeting us. If we would have been given our own land, black prisons, black mayors, black governors, black senators and Congress people would have been put in place on those portions of America where no white person, it says no white person. That was part of the settlement. Does anybody read this stuff? This is part of the special order number 15. That was supposed to be set up for us, but guess what? It didn't happen. None of this came into fruition. None of this got commenced and put in place. It went poof to the bye-bye land because Andrew Johnson didn't want this to happen. Go ahead, Willie.
And I get that. And somebody in the live comments made the connection reservation, and basically what the United States had experience with was reservations, and that pretty much what this deal was going to be. Now, when you talk about police, we have to make sure we understand many areas of the country did not have standing police forces like we have in our country today. Regional authorities that traveled from place to place, but there weren't the police forces like there are now. So I don't want people who are listening or watching to think that when you say police, it's like police, or it's like the Miami police, or the LA police, because most places didn't have police like that. They had maybe one constable, and if they were a bigger city, they might have had a judge or two or three judges there. So it was really different. It was really different. But it is interesting to think about things would have gone through, how different things might have been. It is fascinating to think, what if decisions were made? What would have happened? Now, even with all of this not happening, you look at black or ex-slaves and black people ended up in the Senate and anyway. It's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. But I think you're right. People have to know this was part of the plan, and it didn't get, again, and I'm gonna dovetail back. It didn't get executed. It didn't get carried out at any of the assassination of Lincoln, and of course the presidency of Andrew Johnson. Again, a sympathizer for the South, and was never going to allow that to happen. So what do we do about it now? Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was saying, no, he wasn't going to allow this. This man was a Dixiecrat. This was a racist, bigot, hatred man. The Democrats came out of the Democrat Party, came out of the Dixiecrats, out of the South, out of the Southern.
He was a Democrat.
Southern province.
He was a Democrat. He was a Southern Democrat, because how they did, and this is part of the thing that we don't teach our kids. How they did elections is that whoever came in second place got to be vice president. That's how it worked. It would have been like, if Trump wins the election, Hillary Clinton would have been his vice president, and he would have had to sleep with one eye open every night. But I'm just, but that's how it was. So, and they stopped doing that because of, as soon as something happened to the existing president, then all the policies just swung the other direction in an incredible way. And this is what happened in the assassination of Lincoln with Andrew Johnson. So this is, I mean, if we have to think about why. This is why. And somebody, this was Sherman's. This was part of a general's plan. He didn't really have the authority to make it, and this was their plan. And I think, and you and I were talking off air, and I think, and I'm just spitballing here and have their say, because people in chat rooms always have their say, that maybe the idea came from someone like Frederick Douglass. So when Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, what to do with the freed slaves, we all know what Douglass said. Douglass said, leave them alone. Leave them alone. And Douglass didn't mention reparations or 40 more acres. He didn't mention any of that. He said they will, the industrious will succeed, and those who are not will fail. Leave them alone. This was probably part of all that. But again, interesting to think about what would happen if Hilton Head today still owned by a majority Black family in those places along Savannah, those places along the Eastern Seaboard. The country a bunch different as the country grew up, especially during the Industrial Revolution. That's for sure.
Oh, especially during the Industrial Revolution. I'm just going to play this article number 2, and I'm going to come back to this on another show, but I'm going to finish up with these thoughts on this one, and then we're going to go back to the video because I want to talk about now the ADOS white people. Do they exist, and how do they exist? But I want to finish up with this.
By the laws of war and orders of the President of the United States, the Negro is free and must be dealt with as such. He cannot be subjected to conscription or forced military service, save by the written orders of the highest military authority of the department, under such regulations as the President or Congress may prescribe. Domestic servants, blacksmiths, carpenters, and other mechanics will be free to select their own work and residence, but the young and able-bodied Negroes must be encouraged to enlist as soldiers in the service of the United States, to contribute their share towards maintaining their own freedom and securing their rights as citizens of the United States.
So when we talk about a balanced scale, let's give a hypothetical, and I hate arguing on hypothetics, but I'm going to go back because we're talking about past history. I don't argue on hypothetics. I make it clear to people on that. But this was a theory and a concept that was supposed to be implemented because Lincoln had already said, okay, look, we're going to give you $300 for these Negroes per person right here, right? This is what the slave owners got reparations. Stay with me, people, on this one from Lincoln. Then the next portion was he had a conversation with the man called General Sherman. General Sherman, do your homework, these shows are to spark your mind and make you think. Share this video and like and get the thumbs up because we can get more people in the chat room. I want us to have a discussion. And if you want to join the stream, I put the stream link in there. And when I go back to the stream, I'm going to lightly tap in and add you in. But anyway, General Sherman, as you can see here, had a special set of rules and regulation of what he wanted us to do. He wanted us to have this land. A lot of this land was not workable. It was swampland. It was mosquitoes. It was infested with alligator. It wasn't as beautiful as real estate it was today. But let me make this clear as a real estate agent and a developer and a relocation agent. Land is land. And baby, if it's yours, it's yours. If everybody in this stream right now could have 40 acres of a piece of land in America, I bet you guys will make that thing work. I bet you'd make it work. Despite its setbacks, you would find a way to make it work. And if you were linked up to other landowners of your own diaspora and your own culture, you would make that work, baby. And I love what he said right here. We're talking about Black people who were blacksmiths, carpenters, and merchantmen, who were freedmen who worked with residents. And then they said, if you were a young and body-able Negro, that word Negro is crucial, because that is the word President Obama took out of a lot of pieces of legislation, and he voted that word out. But if you are a young embodied able Negro, not Black, because anybody can say, that they are Black, then you were encouraged, not mandatory. It says to be encouraged to enlist as a soldier and serving in the United States, okay? Because we had already been serving. So we talk about the cross-pollinization that these people, these white colonists, the founding colonists, identified working with the slave owners who were the colonists who had us as commoditized good trades and services today, who colonized with us. But the question is, are any of these people that were slave owners who have children today, are those people ADOS? And that's where we're going to go back to our video and let's have a talk on that one. Let's watch it.
We are now in the space that came to be known as the Grand Central Depot of the Underground Railroad.
Being down there itself wasn't very welcoming because I'm too tall to be down there, and imagining what it was like for them, especially if it was a majority Black men who were down there, You're the son of Jade, the daughter of James, who was the son of Lydia, who was the daughter of Mary Weems. Her parents, John and Arabella, fell in love near Washington, D.C., married, and had children. Mary Weems Savoy, your great-great-grandmother, died in 1936 at the age of 80. She left behind a growing family, and their children's children's children are here today. So I guess we family. Oh my God. Wow.
Are you kidding me? The whole day, this is my cousin?
It's amazing. He reminds me of my brother. He has that same resemblance. And when we first walked up at the water, it was like, okay, wait.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about that before we go into this main part, which I want to talk about. Scott is important. Scott is important. But before we talk about Scott, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I want to appreciate you. But many of you guys are not putting thumbs up. I need you to put thumbs up because it shares the contents and it gets the numbers up so that people understand the educational side of the ADOS movement. A movement that had to take place because of what General Sherman was not able to execute. And everybody in this country continues to tell us their story, which for me becomes a little tiresome. You know, I'm from this country, my people come here, we suffer, my people, my people. And then when we tell our suffrage, we tell our plight, we tell our pain, we have to wait to hit them, let them finish their dissertation of their pain. Well, no longer, my brothers and my sisters. I want you guys to hold your head proud. And I want you to use the resources in understanding Special Order number 15 that didn't get put in place, because I believe the reconstruction of America is the incompletion of what General Sherman could not commemorate. And for us to be able to move forward, we must create a piece of legislation, write that down, a piece of legislation that can make a world of difference if we can at least have a civilized conversation, because there's going to always be people who have discord with us. There's going to be always people who don't agree with how we approach life and things and how they want to tell you what you want and what you should be. But I want to tell you, you don't have to listen to them. Because as you see in this video, here are people who could have passed each other on an everyday basis, not knowing that they run with the same DNA, the same genealogy, the same relationship to the people around them. And you don't even know you got that same thing going on in your life. Go ahead, Willie. What's your take?
You know, again, you're right. And there is a spectrum of people who are concerned with ADOS and there's a spectrum. I was reading the comments about somebody who saw me last time and said, you know, heard last time I was on that, you know, he's all right, he doesn't need anything. Well, and I haven't, and I'm gonna tell you, thanks for watching, thanks for coming on. Please give the video a thumbs up, because and if YouTube likes that, we end up in suggested videos, and we appreciate that. But you know what? I haven't changed my thought of, you know what, I really don't want any who don't like me because of what I look like. I don't need anything from them. Thank you very much. But you know what? To have the discussion about what was supposed to happen and what did discussion. And Shirley, you're right. It is annoying that we in this country are so open to people who come from in the world, and it seems that their story, which is what we're talking about, is always more than the story of Americans, the story of Black Americans. It always takes their story. It always takes the direction. It always takes, you know what? So you get legislation that you're talking about. You get legislation that funds, lands, loans, on and on and on, and special special for people who basically came much later, who came yesterday afternoon at 3 o'clock. They are almost automatic the people and the folks who helped build the country almost automatically. And that's that I believe that as an American must be addressed. And we're not addressing it. And the only way to address it is not other down all the time because we don't agree with every jot and tittle that somebody might say to them, but understand that there is subtle about how Black folks are being ignored, especially legislatively, that over a bunch of years. And in the meantime, while that was going on, Black folks in the South was suffering through all these things were happening. And our story as Americans, see, and this is the thing that people don't get, was not being told, wasn't being told by anybody. And those stories were dying in Black communities, even in the Black church, even in the Black universities, even in the Black schools, those, even in the Black, and especially and more importantly in the Black families, those stories were dying. And there's a reason why we are in the place that we are in now. And I'm telling you, it's not just because it's white men. We have neglected ourselves, and we are each other and ourselves, that we can't build the sort of coalition and cooperation that we need to have these intellectual, peaceful, productive conversations as we move forward.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you on that. So I want to go to the second part. I want to tell you something that's been dear to my heart. I want you to understand, in order for us to get this movement to moving forward, in order for us to bring peace and legislation that makes sense, because legislation is the key. If we don't understand the importance of legislation, and not just bringing people together and talking and gathering, we got to go to the next level, my people. We must put proposals and ideas that make sense, my people. We must move forward with a concept of clarity. The only way we can do that is to bring us to the full circle. And that full circle is that there are white people who are ADOS too. How can white people be ADOS? I think that's always a talk. Well, how can these white people be ADOS? Well, we just talked earlier about the cross-pollination of these white people who slept with our people. And that many of us who are descendants of slaves have the DNA of white colonists. We're not purebred Africans. We're colonists. A lot of people who can't see your grandmother or your great-grandmother. My grandmother, not great, my grandmother was half white. But you can't tell that by looking at me. I'm the most chocolate, beautiful sister you ever want to get your eyes on. But how could you know that just by looking at somebody? Well, they must have some white in them. You must do your homework on yourself. You must take time to invest in you. Nobody can do that but you. And then when you know your own story, then your pain has a healing process. Look at these ladies. When they started understanding their story, that pain subsided, the healing commenced. The pain subsided, the healing commenced. How can you be healed unless you are able to integrate and interact your own healing? Willie, what's your thoughts?
Let me unmute myself. I think that's extremely important that for a lot of people who really need where they are now, I mean, where they came from, and now some of that pain that they've been over the years can start subsiding, because frankly, a lot of times pain in families because there are secrets, and I think that our pain, that the same sort of situation exists inside communities of color. There are things we have not been told or where you came from, and there's been angst over the situation. But when things get explained and especially get explained in a loving, logical way, that maybe now you can start releasing some of that hurt. You know, people who are wake up, for example, who wake up angry at white people, and they stay angry all day because you see it on their face. They be mad all day, every day. They mad at white people until maybe you find out that, you know, like these people are finding out in this video, that's my cousin. That is my cousin. Shared history. We may all have a shared history with your boy Scott here. We might. And that eases pain. And that's because understanding happens. Then we can start moving forward, not only as a people, but as a nation.
Let's move forward.
The experience of coming into this place would have been just one or two people. They would be brought here by a guide. They would land at the Fulton Landing and then walk up the big hill to Brooklyn Heights. And they'd spend a night or 2 nights here and then leave again at night and continue on their way. And when people are here, I always like to give them a little bit of the authentic experience, because it was really more like this. It would have been total darkness. It would have been someone alone.
You are son of Christopher, son of Muriel, who was the daughter of Frank, who was the son of Mary, the daughter of Sophia Gray, who escaped slavery with both of her children through the assistance of the Underground Railroad.
What's so incredibly powerful to me about Sophia Gray is that she went through the Underground Railroad with her 2 children. One was 12 and one was 15. And it was very rare for a woman with children to come through the Underground Railroad because it was very, very dangerous. And so for her to leave with these 2 children and to hide in the hull of a ship, and the ship was boarded. They told the people that boarded them that there might be yellow fever aboard. So luckily they were saved, and they then went to Philadelphia. And then from Philadelphia, they took a carriage to New York and came through the New York Underground Railroad. And then they made their way to Massachusetts.
The only thing I knew was that we were Scottish, and I thought our tie was going to be that my family came through Scotland, through Canada.
Muriel is your grandmother that you don't know a lot about.
Right.
And her father was Frank Albion Andrews. And Frank was a silent film movie star.
Wow.
Wow.
Yes. In fact, he was in films with Mary Pickford.
Wow.
What's fascinating to me is watching the race identification throughout time in the records, where they were listed as mulatto, which means mixed race, black sometimes, but then from about 1910 on, white.
What you're saying is that Sophia and Mary were African American.
Yes.
And just they were lighter skinned, and so at that time they switched it from African American to white.
Yeah, later on. It wasn't until Frank, and I think until he was an actor, and I would speculate that perhaps he needed to make sure he got work.
Right.
And to be a black actor when film started, you were pigeonholed specifically into certain roles, but to be a white actor would give him more opportunity. And he was white enough to pass, as it were.
Do you know where the Andrews name then? I mean, like, because Mary Etta Gray must have married somebody.
She married an
Andrews.
Andrews, who's also African American.
Really? So this is like totally different than my family ever.
You're like, I knew it, right?
I said that.
Did you
It's
say
amazing. Watching.
I'm proud. The hope and the faith that this woman had, who came here by herself and then sat in our basement in the dark, it's unreal. I mean, who would not be inspired by that? These are strong-ass women. These women, like, threw it on their backs and they did it. They survived.
This has been, it's been a moving few hours, and certainly.
Okay, let's stop there. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to digest, my family. That's a lot to have a discussion about. Willie, what is let me add you to the screen. Willie, you were able to kind of watch that perspective. What's your take on it? Here's a man who found out he was related to black.
I knew it was coming. I told you they were cousins. I knew it was coming.
That
isn't just the same.
Well,
I knew that was coming. I wasn't surprised about that at all because it makes sense and it shows of mixed race, of cross pollination that we just don't ever talk about, because the only time that we have that conversation, and that we may have that conversation in schools, whether they're middle, high school, or college, is the evil owner and rape. And that's the only time we have that conversation, when that's not the entire conversation, because that conversation, evil and rape, is a divisive conversation that all that does is going to divide people. This conversation, when these people who are cousins, that's as valid as anything, and unfortunately is hidden, and they were able to find out that a lot of blacks, the Julian Bond types, just started being called white. I don't know if they were passing, but they were white, and so the history got really, really muddy and really hard to see. I think that this conversation, a lot of people, had by a whole bunch of people. So I think
white man, he thought he was Scottish.
Well, yeah,
she said
Scottish.
No, you.
But
she said no. You have Negro blood in him. The lady told him he had Negro blood.
But that stopped him from being Scottish too, and that's the cool part. Doesn't stop him from being Scottish. Doesn't stop them from celebrating Scottish history. But when they got here, something happened different. He ended up being in the lineage of people of ADOS. He ended up being in participant lineage. Now, not that he doesn't participate in the same Scottish lineage, he participated in that as well. And his children forever, participate in both of those lineages. So the question I have, how are we, on how the community going to deal with Scott and his family?
Now that is the question of the show for the day. Let me play that section again. I'm going to do it in some parts. How do we deal with the Scott?
And the ship was boarded. They told the people that boarded them that there might be yellow fever aboard. So luckily they were saved, and they then went to Philadelphia. And then from Philadelphia, they took a carriage to New York and came through the New York Underground Railroad. And then they made their way to Massachusetts.
The only thing I knew was that we were Scottish, and I thought our tie was going to be that my family came through Scotland, through Canada.
Muriel is your grandmother that you don't know a lot about.
Right.
And her father was Frank Albion Andrews. And Frank was a silent film movie star.
Wow.
Yes. In fact, he was in films with Mary Pickford.
Wow.
What's fascinating to me is watching the race identification throughout time in the records, where they were listed as mulatto, which means mixed race.
So let's stop right here. I want you to know that all of you guys have these records in your lineage. Write this down. We're not doing DNA, we're doing genealogy. All of you who are ADOS have these records in your lineage. This is important, that you identify that the Census Bureau knows they're Negroes. When white people tell you, well, how are you supposed to know? How we gonna know all these people? How do we know if these people related to slaves? How do we know they deserve to get paid? How do we know? I'm telling you, they know. They've got your grandfather's name. Here's his father, one of his grandfather's name. They have a circuit. This was a black man. Okay. They have the month, the year you were born. They have the birthplace of your father and your mother. That's what they're saying right here if you can't see it. If you have any school or education, he was an actor, and they have information here, okay? So this is what's interesting, is that we don't understand that this is the documents that were stored and saved through history to clarify what kind of Negro are you. Let's keep going.
Black sometimes, but then from about 1910 on, white.
What you're saying is
So they're saying that it's switched, because what you would see is you see W's and you would see B's and you would see M's. So see how this is a W and see this is an M? Excuse me, see how this is, that's male, female. But if you see W's were white, B's were black, and M's were mulatto. And a lot of the mulattoes started saying, I'm not mulatto, I'm white. I'm a white person. And what they realized is that their ancestors were slaves who said, I do better passing than I do being impoverished and in pain. That doesn't mean that they might have been ashamed of being black, but they were pushed to this point of leveraging what they had, which was their skin and their hair. And that light-skinned Negro didn't want to be black anymore. They wanted to be white.
Is that Sophia and Mary were African American.
Yes.
And just they were lighter skinned, and so it just at that time they switched it from African American to white.
Yeah, later on. It wasn't until Frank, and I think until he was an actor, and I would speculate that perhaps he needed to make sure he got work.
Right.
And to be a black actor when film started, you were pigeonholed specifically into certain roles.
Now hold on, listen to this. This is his great-grandfather. His great-grandfather, this man right here, Scott, who said, look, you're telling me my great-grandfather was black that switched to white? But he was light-skinned, which means he probably had mulatto in there. That mulatto was in there. And she said, look, he needed to feed his family. So I know what I can do. I look enough to pass. I'm going to do it.
But to be a white actor would give him more opportunity.
So
and he was white enough to pass, as it were.
Do you know where the Andrews name then? I mean, like, because Etta Gray must have married somebody.
She married
named
an Andrews, who's also African American.
Really? So this is like totally different than my family ever.
So now he's awakened. See, many people are asleep, my people. White and black people are asleep. They don't realize that a lot of white people have black slave ancestors on both sides of their DNA, of their family lineage. They don't know it. They don't know it. And they don't know the awakening of having that knowledge. But this is the question, because there's a movement now. There are black people talking about, I'm an ancestor, I'm a descendant of slaves, I want my reparations, I want my acre, I might want, rah, 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 rah. I get it. But you realize, take a deep breath, that there are going to be some white people who are going to say they're ADOS. And guess what? They're right.
You're like, I knew it, right?
I said that, though.
Did you
It's
say
amazing. I said to watch.
I'm proud. The hope and the faith that this woman had, who came here by herself and then sat in our basement in the dark, it's unreal. I mean, who would not be inspired by that? These are strong-ass women. These women, like, threw it on their backs and they did it. They survived.
This has been, it's been a moving few hours, and certainly last hour or so. I have to say, I read this and I listen to these stories, and you just feel like you're not doing enough. You just feel like you're not doing enough.
It's like, I don't think that any of us, I don't know, could really say what you really were going to expect. It's just like, so you're like, okay, we'll just take this journey. My cousin keeps saying it's an adventure that we're just going to take and we're just going to do it. And, it's amazing because as you sit here and read the letter and you're sitting in this place, it's just so much emotion and everything comes over you. It's unreal.
We all have made each other's history happen, and ultimately it's learning from our mistakes and trying to make the next decision better than the last, and trying to make sure that we leave our story better than we found it.
My grandfather taught us that you only get one name. And what are you going to do with your name? What comes behind it?
I come from a really, really strong, tight-knit family. To see the information that Ancestry gave us further proves that's how our family lineage is, because from the Weems on down, everybody just stood together. From finding out from John and Arabella that he fought to get his family back together, and to see now that we come from this legacy of family and fortitude and sticking in there and just not letting anything waver is just like totally mind-blowing, because it all makes sense now. It's like it's all come together, it's all full circle, it all makes sense.
That word estimable, that adjective that I encountered when I was 9, how did that make me feel? That I inherited, I hope, some of her estimation, and that maybe I could go on and become an estimable person too. That we are the sum total of our ancestors. You're not limited by their limitations, but you have the potential of their accumulated sets of possibilities. And you are a product of their stories, even though you don't know it.
Thank you guys so much for sharing and liking and watching these videos, because it really means a lot to me that we are able to have these discussions. The more we have these discussions, the more we have clarity. We have another person in our chat room, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Research has joined on board. Mr. Research. Mr. Research.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good, my brother. Today's topic has been, basically white people are ADOS too. And I think one of the questions, which I knew was going to come up, and I'm going to put it up there, you gentlemen, do white people get reparations when they don't claim to be black, but they claim to have black ancestors? That's a good question that Bob asked after we've just watched that. We've learned that white people are ADOS too.
Well, let me quickly say the $5 Indians, the 5-cent Indians, the nickel Indians, this has always repeated itself every time something has come up. You look at the reparations for the Italian people that got hanged in Louisiana. All this stuff has come up before. And what gets disingenuous sometimes is we as people with melanated skin don't understand that we're being manipulated to go against our grandchild's benefit. Sometimes we're so enthralled in our own concept that we don't think that. Look at the Scottish King Duh or the King of Alba. All of them were from Niger. From Niger. They were kings of those lands. Look at the great poet of Russia, who was an Ethiopian slave that rose up. When they had the celebration for his lineage, his white, blue-eyed great-grandchildren came from Poland, not even knowing that he was the legendary Russian poet, not knowing that they had that connection. So a lot of times what happens with the ADOS thing and just anything that's melanated black skin in general, we're not passing down that family dynamic from child to child. You look at Grace Jones, blue-eyed granddaughter right now. You look at Diane Carroll's blue-eyed granddaughter. You wouldn't know that they were black. So what we have to do, and I said this even before all this talk came about, you have to have a system of vetting. You have to have a system of vetting, and the righteous thing to do is get the guaranteed people first, the people that are without challenge, the people who did keep decent records, or they're able to train. You got to use the same mechanism that Native Americans use, to where you can trace down whose mother was this and whose mother was that. If not, you'll have a lot of people come in and pretend like, and here's my last point, like There's Indian people from India and Pakistan who shave their head and go get a fade and pretend to be black just so they can get part of the Negro College Fund. One of the famous people who did this was Mindy's brother, who went to a historically black college pretending to be black so he can get all that Negro College Fund money and end up becoming a doctor. And as soon as he became a doctor, he started trashing the black community. So we have to have a vetting.
I totally agree with you, Willie. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you know what, Mr. Research, I know he says he wins all. You know what? Here's the deal. You're right. If you're going to go through this process, and you guys already know how I feel about it, but if you're going to go through this process, there's got to be a way to vet. And I think the Native Americans have come up with a pretty good way of vetting. And then you got to let the people with no challenges go ahead and go first. It's easy to verify. You just move forward. And as things move on, as it gets more and more difficult to verify, then people associating themselves with being ADOS will have to find a way to prove it. And there is data out there. And I mentioned earlier, in larger northern cities, a lot of the birth records were pretty easy to find because they were kept by government. In cities, a lot of those records were kept by the church. And when those churches disappeared, a lot of times the records did. I have relatives who basically, when they became adults, didn't have birth certificates because they weren't born in a hospital, and any had was kept by the church at the time, and the church, went burned down or went away or whatever. So keeping those kind of records in certain places in the United States, in other places, not as easy. And in certain places, those records are completely unavailable. But I think Mrs. Research is right. And those records, and it's easy for people to do. You have to have a system of vetting. And yes, that vetting process is going to cause friction. That's okay. Friction is not a reason not to do something. If you believe it's the right thing to do. But if you're okay with the friction and developing the vetting system, and I don't know who gets to do that. I'm guessing it's going to, you guys will get together and scratch that out on a cocktail napkin or something and make that happen. But he's absolutely right. But I don't know when it gets done or how it gets done. But I'm looking forward to watching the show.
Go ahead, Research.
No, you go ahead.
And I just want to say this. I think vetting starts now and here, where we have discussions, where we look in the chat room and we learn to meet each other online, and we make a decision on how do we find the material for vetting. You use the Native America. I would like to share my point of view of vetting, and that's the Daughters of the Revolution. And the Daughters of the Revolution go back to 1776. Where there are these group of women and men called the Sons of the Revolutionary War, and they're Black and white people who have a strong vetting process to join their organization. Now, it's not based on just DNA. They have a whole process of basic genealogy that they take you through to determine if you are a daughter or a son of the Revolutionary War. Remember, this is where we broke away from Great Britain. Well, white Americans who left Britain said, we're going to create America, and we are part of the founding father children. And they always wanted to make sure that their children and their daughters and their sons remember the origin of the foundation makers. So they vetted themselves by creating an organization called the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I'm going to share that in a second. But go ahead, Mr. Research, before I do.
And let me also say to the naysayers of those who either don't want this to happen or what have you, these things have happened before. So as I always say, if you disagree with it, I would love for you to go to the Italians and tell them right now, give back all the money you got. I would love for you to go over to Israel and say, hey, you guys are really Polish and Hitler did that to you. I don't understand why we Americans are paying you every year since 1941. We didn't do that to you. So, these things happen, and we need to have consistency on our disgruntledness. So the other thing is that even if the reparations don't happen, cool. At least we need to take a step forward for our grandchildren when they're in the financial position to have lobbyists up in the Senate and get it for them if necessary. I just think we need to move, as Shirley always say, move the conversation forward, because many a times there are some of us who speak such anti-blackness or anti-move forwardness that it becomes disingenuous to why they are in our spaces. If we fail, we fail. But don't come in with the pom-poms and the cheerleading for these outside people to hope that we fall flat, because you didn't do that with the Italians and you don't do that with the Polish people living in Israel every year. I'm not a hater. I'm just trying to explain, hey, and look, and shout out to the people in the chat room who call names. Intellectualism does not name call. If you're really high functioning, name calling, that's a low standard. That means you can't compete. Okay? Much love to everybody.
A lot of love to everyone. Absolutely. I mean, there are people in the chat room who may not agree or disagree on what we're talking about, but this is how we grow. And there are going to be people who will fight against us because they want to make sure they keep their foot on our head. They keep their foot on our neck. They keep our backs down. They shoot us from the back. They think that their story and their issues need to come first, and we need to hear their stories. When we can't even discuss our own in a private matter or an open matter where other people can hear and have a civil conversations about that. And I think that's the part that is disheartening to me, that there are people who are in the chat room who may watch this video who become appalled or upset and want to say, but what about my story? And you need to be quiet, Black woman, Black man. You all need to be quiet and you need to understand my pain. Well, we're tired of your pain because you're ignoring ours and our numbers are drilling. But that is maybe part of your agenda. That is part of your plight. But again, we're talking about vetting right now, right? Vetting who we are, vetting what we've done, vetting what we bring to the table. That's what we're talking about, vetting. Mr. Research brought in the fact that the Native Americans, a sovereign nation of people who got sovereignty under Lincoln, people who were considered a sovereign nation of people. We didn't even get that. So now there's people who are in existence today who understand that they're the foundational children. They call themselves the daughters of the Revolutionary War, American Revolutionary War. And I think you guys, you need to step in and help me and Mr. Research and Willie. This is not a one-man show. There's no real full answer to what we're going on. This is historical moments. This is revolutionary moments that we're having on social media, bringing conversations to the table, bringing calculations and data from platforms like Tone Talks and Yvette and Tariq and so many people like Mr. Research and Afro Synergy News and Phil. Shout out to Phil from the Advice Show and the Nubian Queen and Willie Larson. There's so many people out there that we may agree or disagree with Dr. Umar, whoever they may be, but they bring something to the table of discussion.
Let me also say, going into what you just said, it's time for the people who even disagree to put your intellectual meat on the table. Because shouting people down or stopping people from talking, I can disagree with a whole bunch of people. Okay? If they're able to move something that even benefits me 1/10, okay, fine. But what we're doing nowadays in this 1995 internet age, we're trying to shout down things we don't like. And what we fail to realize is other people are simultaneously working as a group. And they're looking at their flag before skin color, meaning that just like the 2 Russian spies that got caught in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. See, they used that skin to get in there, but they never had no love for white Americans. So we have to always be careful of this disagreement. Keep it intellectual, keep it logical. Let's not get into the, hey, I just don't want you to speak because I disagree. Because, like I said, if we fail, so what? But if we succeed, don't come run in all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. That's like the story of the little chicken. You guys need to study these story rhymes. Remember, I talk about games, and one of my favorite stories is the little chicken. And we go through that on another video, but read that story, because in the end, she bakes that bread, and all the people that she had and she asked to help her, all of a sudden, they all want a slice of that bread. So the question is the vetting process, and what is that process that is going to take place? I want to share a little bit more on vetting and what I want you guys to do research, because the more research we all do, because Mr. Research is not the all for all person who is the researcher. Neither is Shirley, neither is Willie. This is a family effort, my family, my ADOS family. We must change the urban game in the community. We get out there and we hold elected officials accountable, but we're talking about self-accountability. And if we're not going to have a self-accountability on the table, then we are going to fail ourselves. By identifying that, we can make a world of difference. But again, this is about vetting who we are. Now, the Daughters of the Revolution there. This is the organization I'm going to share with you that basically came together so that they wanted to make sure that their children's children knew who they were and what they brought to the table doing the Revolutionary War, not the Civil War, the American Revolutionary War, the Foundational War. That's these women. So the question is, how do they vet that this woman, how do they vet that you are a daughter or a son of the Revolutionary War? Well, that's what we're going to see in this video here.
Women working together for America, sharing a bond that has lasted for generations. These are the Daughters of the American Revolution, dedicated to their love of God, home, and country.
I'm very proud to be a member of the DAR because it encompasses all that I believe in.
More than 2 centuries after their patriot ancestors founded this nation, today's DAR is still preserving the ideals that made America great by serving communities across the country.
You get this wonderful feeling at the end of the day that I have accomplished something. I have made a difference. And the people's lives that you touched are infinitely more enriched because DAR has walked into their lives.
The DAR's commitment to America begins with its newest citizens. Today's daughters attend naturalization ceremonies like this one in Houston.
So I want to stop there because they do participate in immigration, because that's where the displacement comes upon our part, where we have immigration and illegal immigration that has now stepped to the forefront, and they want participation in the foundation of America, because now we shifted of what America originated from. You remember, we were brought here as commoditized good trades and service. We were brought here to build this country. We were also brought here to colonize the earth of America. We learned that because we just watched the video where a white man didn't know he got Negro in him. And then, like the chat room says, how much Negro do you have to have that circumvent the ones that are truly struggling? Because is it about Black people, or is it about the lineage of Black people, and it classify who qualifies and who doesn't? And how do we qualify these people? Well, the ADOS have to recognize the Daughters of the Revolution, which is these women that we saw, are out there in the community, and they're dealing with today's times, which is immigration. But I want you to get to the point where you understand that they have a membership, that when you go through their membership process, and that membership process basically allows you to do your homework, but you still got to do your DNA homework. You have to do your homework. And if you don't do your homework, then you will fail.
Can I
go ahead?
Can I just insert 30 seconds? And that's the same thing with the $5 Indian. Yeah, there were people going in playing, pretending that they were, but in some of that paperwork, you had to sign up that you and your family acknowledge that you are of Indian descent, and you are now attached to and forever to this particular nation. We don't call them tribes, we call them nations, to this particular nation. And so if you're going to talk about what quarter and blah, 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 you're also going to get a percentage of people who don't want to be forever and ever tied to, hey, me and my family forever will be ADOS. You're going to have a lot of people bail out on that. Well, no, I wanted the money, but I don't want to pretend that far. So, there are mechanisms.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the interesting for me is that they have a really interesting breakdown where they tell you go to libraries and resources. And look, there's black women. There are black women in their layout because these are black and white people. You don't see Mexicans. You don't see Asians. They are talking about foundational people, which were black and white people. Do you all see this here? Now, they also have sons of the Revolutionary War. They also have daughters and sons of World War I and World War II. But the Revolutionary War is the war that we want to go back to because that's the origin of America. They've always stayed together and they've always had conversations. But we come into place during the Civil War of the Emancipation. And because the Emancipation came into place, we never got what General Sherman talked about, where he proposed them to leave us alone. We had Frederick Douglass said, leave us alone. And General Sherman came up with some rules here. You guys need to read these articles. And then you find out what the slave owner says, but what about my slave? I'm broke now. That was some free Negro. That was some free humans. Well, Lincoln said, fine, that's fine. I'll give you reparations. But those black people never got it because he died. And so General Sherman's special order never came into fruition. And there we have the incompletion of the Reconstruction of America. But if we're going to complete it, my brothers and sisters, and if we're going to put this piece of legislation of the completion of the Reconstruction, we need to vet people in the process of ordering what we want. If we even just go down and put everything that General Sherman allocated, and then bring it into today's time and era. Mr. Research, what's your thought on that?
Well, I look at it like this, and I'll cut it real short. Whatever we do, we need to, before we die, make a valid attempt to get something documented. It's the same thing I say to people about getting the conversation started in the house. If it goes down on paper and you can say you got it started, by the time your grandchild gets here, he doesn't have to do that fight now. Now he doesn't have to do that fight. That fight has already been started at least. And I'll keep it short like that.
Absolutely. Willie, what's your thought on the matter?
Well, I think that already been said. If we're going to have this discussion, if we're going to continue this conversation, this may not be something that happens in our lifetime. Who think that's nonsense? Of course, it can happen, but it might not be something that happens in our lifetime. But if we don't get the conversation, somebody else will have to pick it up. And again, I'm all about having the conversation. I'm not all about calling people names and stuff. Conversation and being open. And even if I don't pick up the flag and run to the front. And I'm not Crispus Attucks on every single issue, but I'm about being able to have. I think having the conversation, the Mr. Research is right, is that at least now your grandchildren don't have to till that ground because you've already tilled it.
Well, I always believe it's about execution, and I do believe it's going to execute under this administration. I believe that this president can make a world of difference, but he's not going to do anything unless we ask, unless we prepare, unless we unite. If we don't continue to just beat each other up for whatever reason, we have to have good common sense, and we have to identify who we are and where we're coming from and what should have been allocated. But if you're going to have the Reconstruction of America, happened for white Americans and not happened for Black people, we are part of the aftermath. Because what we've seen, my brothers and sisters, instead of saying, well, we're freed slaves, but then we have privatized prisons.
Well,
we have so many things that have disjointed us from really getting a full benefit of Americanism. So when they say, well, you're all the same, we're all the same, we're not, because of the special order number 15 never coming into fruition, and the fact that reparations never come into a full completion of what was allocated and not allocated towards us. Go ahead, Mr. Research.
You know what? I just want to tag in what you just said there, because I want to say something controversial. I say to a lot of conservatives, and I've been a conservative since the late 80s, what if Ronald Reagan had never busted up the unions? What if Clinton had never brought NAFTA? You see, the people forgot about, hey, these people are Americans too. Why sit up here back when Coca-Cola was 15 cents and a quarter and somebody in Thailand had to pay $15? Why did we care so much that that person had to pay $15 when your son, my son, your daughter can work at the Coca-Cola plant? Now, what we've done, particularly talking about some of our white cousins, we've tried to keep the other Americans, Black Americans, brown Americans, from something that we've endeared ourselves to outside of America so much that now our white cousins are feeling the effect also. And they're realizing, wait a minute, we've done a little too much. I remember when Ross Perot said to Al Gore, why would you want to do NAFTA when you can go right down to the urban Black community? This was during their debate, and give them these same jobs for 75 cents on the dollar. What we've done, my white cousins, is that you've allowed these systems on both parties to come in and bust up families. And now it's come to backfire. Willie, what are your thoughts, man?
I wasn't prepared for a Ross Perot reference. Good God, man. But you're right. You know what? I think that have made a huge error in looking across the border. A lot of times when a lot of the help that things I say all the time is people who needed the assistance was right here, and people who were ready to do the work were already right here, and right here, you know, in our communities. And I think that they continue looking outside, and we're still doing it, and we're still doing with you know what, people having to train their replacement because they're bringing in an H1, somebody with an H1 visa. All these things are continuing to happen, and you're right. White folks are starting to lose the group, aren't working for them. I think they worked well under certain circumstances, but as the world economy, it increases and improves, and developing nations or developing nations become more and more a part of the deal, that plan, that methodology is something that isn't going to work for them. And then your help was here all along, because it was here all along. And I think that's going to be, I think that's an interesting, and frankly, I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't have any idea how that's going to work out moving forward.
Well, Willie, it's going to work out. And I'm sorry, Shirley, but I think this is interesting for the listeners. It's going to work out to what's happening now, where each industry is going to be dominated by flag people, meaning that people who have more of an interest in their own ethnicity controlling the industry as opposed to being American. You're starting to see it now, to where people, I remember some guy asked Biden, hey, how can we get some little young kid, 22, 24, hey, my dad has a business bringing in H1 visa people. How can we bring in more? Not how can I hire people who are homeless with PhDs and ready to work in coding, or not that. How can I get more of my flag over here? And that's what a lot of people don't understand. It ain't no hate toward those people. But it's kind of like when Cat Williams, the comedian, got into an argument with a brother of Mexican descent, and Cat Williams said, I'm for America. What are you for?" And he said, "I'm Hispanic." He said, "And you Hispanic, but what are you for?" He said, "I'm from Mexico." "So what are you doing here?" We got too many people who are putting America third, but they're benefiting. So we as Black people or people with dark skin, because let's include the negritas and negritos, we got to start understanding that putting our financial resources together for a common cause is better than me saying, "Oh, what Shirley trying to do ain't gonna matter. Oh, let me shame Tone, or let me shame Tariq, or let me shame Willie." No, throw all of the stuff at the wall. Let's see what sticks, because it may benefit. Because guess what? I'm gonna tell you, some of the people who are not about America, they're gonna show their heads, and you guys are gonna be sitting up there like, "Oh my God, I thought they were." Nope, they're about their flag.
That is so true. Oh my God, that is so true. Because in California right now, we are dealing with separatism. I call it the word separatism, where people have segregated themselves purposely against and away from everyone else. They come here and they live in quadrum. It's a bad version of Epcot. And if anything, I want to say to my brothers and sisters who are not in California, you need to wake up. You need to wake up to the fact that there are other people who are coming into your state that do not want to assimilate. They do not want to associate, do not want to be even part of your diaspora or your community. They're only there to seize, to conquer, and to multiply their families in your businesses. You need to pay attention to your governors and your legislator, political community leaders, and who they hire, and how the state and local school boards and water boards and who they hire. Because as soon as you hire someone who may not be American or ADOS, then there comes their cousins, their uncles, and everybody else. And so, like Mr. Research said, very clear, look, are you a proud American? I'm a proud Mexican. I'm a proud El Salvadorian. I'm a proud Arab. I'm a proud Lebanese. But are you a proud American? And the answer is no. So what does that do for you, my brothers and sisters? Well, first of all, you are down at the bottom already. You know that. And so there's circumventing opportunities that you could have acquired to benefit their plight in the bigger picture of the whole scope of this, the mega that we're having here. And the purpose of this discussion tonight is that you understand that our real ties are with our ancestors, these white people who are our cousins, who multiplied and generated and pollinated this earth called United States of America. These colonists have the right to do what they want, but they also have the responsibility to the descendants of slaves who came here unwillingly as commoditized good, trades, and service. And fast forward, because of Special Order number 15 not implemented and a clarification of what to do, we have just been the aftermath and the turmoil of government, and nothing has been stuck in place of a protective sovereign nation of Blacks, and we need to implement that.
Absolutely. Let me also jump in before you go to your next subtitle, Shirley. California. Hey, look. Let's keep it honest. California has had Republican governors. California has had Republican representatives. A lot of California's demise started with the energy crisis before Schwarzenegger came in. So we can't all say it's at the helm of Dems, even though a lot of it is. So while a lot of people out there teasing about how California does this thing, remember, how goes California sometimes goes the rest of the nation. So if you guys feel how you feel about looking at California, then you need to go to your city council and get out these new people who just became treasurer, just became controller. See, it's easy to tease, hey, looking at California, but somebody just became treasurer in your city. Somebody just became the controller in your city. And they're already changing things to fit the place that they used to live. Maybe they were from Cleveland, and now they want your Texas place to look like Cleveland. Maybe they were from Romania, and now you start seeing all these little colored elephants everywhere. See, it's easy to just say, hey, blah, 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 blah. You guys need to start going down to your city council and get familiar with who's there. Sorry, Shirley.
No, I love it. I love it. Go ahead, Willie. What were you going to say?
Like me for a second. I thought I was talking, but apparently I wasn't. All this starts local. And that's where the smallest group of us can have the biggest impact. Looking at who's getting elected to the school board, looking who's getting elected to mayor, where they're coming from, and doing what I've called for a lot of years a sort of a prophylactic approach to government, that you can protect where you live from the scourge of ideas and ideologies that don't, who have built where you live. Again, I'm in Florida, and I do think that I'm in a wonderful. As we're talking about, the United States. I'm in a place that doesn't
where are you
weather
in
rocks.
Lehigh, Will?
No, I'm not.
Where are you in Lehigh?
Tampa. I'm in Tampa. I'm not in
Okay.
Lehigh. But you know what? But as far as as all the creature comforts, we do well here. We don't have a state income tax, and taxes and lifestyle is fairly inexpensive. And in the large areas, minorities have a pretty large say in local affairs, especially where I live. So I'm okay with that, and I'm excited about that. But I don't see what you see other places happening here at the same degree. But I'm dang sure understand how important it is to be involved with not just local government, but there are all sorts of other entities that get power, that get influence, they get money, that make things happen, that make things change, and we don't pay much attention to because we don't have that, because we're not behind that flag, and we don't have a bunch of Armenians and the like here, but the Colombians are making a presence in sure. And there are people who are watching those kind of things. I think you should watch those kind of things where you are, and you don't have to be a xenophobe, and you don't be a racist. You don't have to be any of those things, but you have to be very conscious about protecting what you've built. And I think that you can do that by participating in local organizations and being part of change and being part of the discussion, as opposed to watching everything from the sideline.
Well, something about Florida, people got to pay attention. Florida is a community of people who 60, 65, 70% have retired. And they're willing to financially support any and everything that keeps that retirement thought process rolling. Certain industries are not allowed to work to raise its head in Florida, which is why there's a lot of more so service industries as opposed to a lot of other things. So Florida is a culture of people who keep a tight knit on, hey, I want to be able to go outside, enjoy the sun, enjoy this rain, and get some overcast and be like, whoo, I'm tired. So they're willing to do any and everything to protect that. And shout out to Aaron Collins. I do want to say this about the Ethiopian Korean town that you brought up. What y'all got to understand, other ethnicities are going in and they getting Shirley's tax dollars, my tax dollars, and Will's tax dollars. And they're going in and they're creating business centers. That's how it always starts. They create a business center where their people can get together, and then they start looking at what they can collectively buy and buy into. We can do the same thing, but we got to stop the naysayers from taking over the microphone. Sorry, Shirley.
No, I love that. I was going to comment on what Aaron Collins said as well. Aaron's out here in California. I'm out here in California. You're out here in California. And when I tell you bad versions of Epcot, he's exactly right. There are signs that are on freeways Listen to me and my people in the cities that say, welcome to Little Tokyo. Welcome to Little Chinatown. Welcome to Little Ethiopia. I thought we were in America. No. You're in Thailand. You're in Bangladesh. You're in Little Armenia. Because they want to acclimate their rights and positions on the soil of America and use the infrastructure of America, but promote their propaganda of who they are and what they want for their people. And I find it interesting, and I'm not shaming or disbanding what they're doing, but in some way I want to say, how real America is this? Because what we're finding with these people is they don't respect our people. Our people were there in those communities before they were, and now we're homeless. We have thousands and hundreds and thousands of Black homeless people. 80 to 90% of the people are homeless who are maybe in these communities. And I say maybe because they know how to get us out. And when you go through these cities that you see that Aaron has right here, little Ethiopia, little Koreatown, little Tokyo town, they have been able to build those Korean towns in the Black community off of the Black hair industry so that they can build a subdivision of a place for their whereabouts and where they can live. Listen to me. Share this video, get the like buttons up and put some comments in there. And someone tell me, am I telling the truth? Because unless we continue to feed the China man, feed the Korean man, free the Filipino man of his antics, and he doesn't want to feed you. He doesn't come to your Black soul food restaurant. He doesn't support your business because he doesn't think you're able or capable of doing it. Because society, including us, have allowed them to circumvent us in a power and economic way. And it's no longer accepted. This is why the ADOS movement is what I said. It is a movement. It is not about the organizations or the names of your group. It is a movement to identify American descendants of slaves, primarily African American descendants of slaves, whose parents contribute to the foundation of America and whose children did not get the full benefits of the reconstruction of America.
You know, let me say this because somebody was talking about the California taxes. Let me help you as far as Northern California. I have always said this the day I saw the rapper Eazy-E go into the White House as a Republican. I say Republicans may say disrespectful anti-Black things from time to time, but at least they will allow you to make money with them. At least they will allow you to do things. Now, some people don't like it when I say that, but when I talk about liberals and Democrats, they're so money hungry that they will sit up here and burn stuff down just to get more revenue. When you look at the Patriot Act, to go to what Shirley said about private jails, the Patriot Act said that, hey, now Willie's driving down the street. Willie has not switched lanes. He hasn't done nothing inappropriate, but I'm going to use this Patriot Act that really is set up for terrorists. I'm going to use it and run Willie's plate through the FBI system and see if I can create a reason to pull Willie over. In an effort to get Willie's car, hold him in jail for 2-3 days, have a little conglomerate business with the tow company. See, when you guys talk about taxes, let's look at all of it. California has this thing where now that it's taken all these people from Cleveland and all these what I call desert cities, the industry has dried up, so those children have nothing to do there. Now they come to California. So when you see these increases in taxes and what have you, it's because now a lot of our Democrats look at it like, oh, now we can get some money. Let's jack this up. Did a lot of you guys know that your average person living in a condo don't pay no taxes, that the homeowners have to pay? So if you got 100 people renting out a unit in a big condominium building, the person who owns the condominium building pays taxes on the land. But you got to remember, there's 100 people in that building. So the taxes on his land may only be 25 or 30 people. Let's just round off that number. But what about the other 60? Well, they got to use the bathroom too. They got to use the sewer system. They're not paying anything but an HOA. Guess who pays that? The people who own actual houses. So when you guys are looking at our tax system, or we're getting killed on this and killed on that, a lot of that is with the influx of people who have come here, and they're manipulating the system. So we wouldn't pay as high taxes if some of these condominium people had their hand in the blender the same way the actual homeowner does, which is why Shirley Franklin, when she was mayor in Atlanta, tried to do the same thing. People was working outside of Atlanta, was living outside of Atlanta, but driving into Atlanta to work. Well, she can't tax these people who live in other cities. So she wanted to put up a toll booth so she can charge these people so they can help pay for the sewer system they use every day. They didn't want to do that. They put it all on the backs of the actual Atlanta residents, which is why Atlanta residents pay higher taxes than some of the people outside. So look at it in that way. I just want to break down that math.
I think that what we're bringing to the table today, gentlemen, and I thank you guys so much for subscribing. Make sure you subscribe and click the like button and subscribe and share with your friends, because
and donate to Shirley. Donate.
I would appreciate the donations. That really makes a world of difference. And I appreciate you guys also support Willie Larson and the Fight Back Media Network. And please follow Mr. Research. These men are more adamant about being more online and sharing knowledge, because knowledge is power. Knowledge enlightens us. Knowledge takes us to the next level. It adds something of substance to the table. And when you watch this video, I know we went 2 hours, it was longer than I normally go, but I want us to understand that this movement is crucial. The breakdown of the movement and questions that are going to come awry. When we talk about, remember, the subject matter is the white ADOS, and where do white people play a part of that? And then we broke that part down to different ways of understanding the vetting process. One could be through the daughters of how the Revolutionary women do theirs. Willie said it might be how the Native Americans do their vetting process. But there is a process that has to commence. And then the question that is going to answer the white elephant in the room is, does that white elephant get a piece of the pie? Because that same white man's been claiming to be white for how many generations? But then he's got black agenda. He has a black descendant of slave in his lineage. He also is ADOS. Do we deny him? Do we accept him? Will he join our fight? These are all the questions that we have to ask, because there needs to be some determination in that. There needs to be some determination in that. Willie, what's your thought?
There's lots to do, and there's many questions, and going to get answered fully this evening. This is going to be a process for sure, and I think that again, cooperation and building community and building coalitions is the way forward. Now I'm gonna have to bail because I love you guys, but you know what? It gets later on the West Coast, and
it does, and we're actually ending the show right now. So I want to make sure that, Willie, you give your sign off. Tell people how they can reach you and how they can watch you.
Yeah, you can actually you can search for fightbackmedia.com, fightbackmedia.com. You scroll down, you'll see a record album, and you'll see and you click on that, and you'll go right to their 24/7 365 network that has a podcast that I'm doing with my friend Paul Swanson on the Swanson Report, the morning report that airs every day, and funny, my opinion show. So you can listen to all of that. You can go and find me on YouTube, and you can subscribe and comment or do. But you know what? Any engagement, they say, any engagement is good engagement, right? So that will be helpful. And Shirley, thanks for calling. This research, always good being on with you, and all the people in the chat room. Thanks for popping in. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to this That's the way that YouTube likes it, and it's the only way that we're going to grow.
Absolutely. Fightbackmedia.com. No doubt.
Fightbackmedia.com.
Mr. Research, can you share your, how can we reach you, Mr. Research?
Hey, you reach me at askaclassyblackman.com. I'm going to be doing more things. I do the political stuff on Sundays. Good morning, ADOS News. And I just touch in how Black folks need to pay attention. Get away from listening to these Black folks who are still talking about dating, still talking about the struggles of being a millennial. Got to start talking about power. Even if we disagree, you got to start talking about power. Shout out to everybody. I will say this. If we can get to the point where we appreciate, just like me and Willie did just a second ago, you can appreciate a person's viewpoint without being disrespectful to each other. See, the great separation is happening, ladies and gentlemen. Classism is about to really jump off. The Blacks who have achieved versus the Blacks that want to stand still. It's not going to keep going on. Even for people who are liberal, it's not going to keep coming on, because now you got people who are standing still through whatever way they've been raised, and they're starting to take advantage. It's kind of like I say about some of the homeless people. Like, I've been homeless twice. I fought back each time. I'm a warrior about mine. But some people want to be homeless and stay next to community so they can use water. And I saw a dude taking a bath 3 a.m. With my neighbor's water, and all this type of stuff. We have to start getting a little bit heavy-handed with our ADOS brothers and sisters, not in a disrespectful way, but in a way that says, "Hey, are you ready to change your life right now? Let's do that. If not, we need to do the great separation." And that's just what it is, man, because our children can't succeed. And my last point, the kids of 2025 and 2030 are going to look back at the Blacks of 2000 and say, what have y'all really done? The 70s had the Black Panthers. The 80s created financial revolution. The 90s fought back from what Bill Clinton did with NAFTA, and they put us back on the plat. It's 2000. Y'all got the internet. What have y'all created? Why don't you have your own Black Teamsters union? Why aren't you controlling the movie industry? Tyler Perry built that studio years ago. See, our grandchildren are going to look and be like, all y'all did during the 2000s was talk. We got to do more than that.
And on that note, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show. Make sure you guys put the thumbs up button, share this video. Let's continue to have the conversation. What difference can we all make in this world today? Thank you for your time, your energy. Lots of love. Good night.